The breaking news out of Washington, D.C. The White House on lockdown for a time this afternoon after the Secret Service shot a gunman near the Washington Monument just blocks away.
The Secret Service deputy director was asked if this was an attempt on the president's life.
I'm not going to guess on that. I can tell you that every time, one, we're patrolling this area and every site we do 24/7 hardcore. Whether or not it was directed to the president or not, I don't know, but we will find out.
So this is a developing story, but let's discuss some of the recent ordeals of violence that we've witnessed in Washington, D.C. Because on one hand, we have a key update on the would-be assassination attempt that took place at the White House Correspondents Dinner. And at the other hand, we may have just witnessed yet another assassination attempt today in D.C. They're not exactly sure at the moment, but what we do know is that Secret Service got into a shootout with a guy about a mile from the White House and right by J.D. Vance's motorcade. We know that the White House was placed on lockdown as a result. National Guard was deployed. So at the very least, this is definitely a security situation, a potential assassination or political violence. I guess we'll leave it at that for the time being until we learn more. But definitely it's the type of headline after witnessing what just went down at the Correspondents' Dinner that puts you on very severe edge, and it wouldn't be a big mystery as to where this type of behavior might be coming from. So while that is all taking place, well, it turns out that if we had this running conspiracy or maybe a joke that there would be a woke judge against the Trump assassin at the Correspondents' Dinner who would somehow find a way to let the guy off the hook, I regret to inform people maybe we're not actually joking after all, because today the U.S. magistrate judge who's currently overseeing the case apparently just apologized to the would-be Trump assassin, claiming he's being mistreated and that he doesn't understand why federal authorities are putting him in solitary confinement and suicide watch after he just tried to assassinate the president. I really wonder why that could be the case, but you cannot make this stuff up. We have this judge basically framing it as not that big of a deal what the guy committed, and after all, it would be in the nature, yes, of woke judges to basically let a potential presidential assassin off the hook in the name of freaking criminal justice reform. Yeah, we have a severe judicial insurrection problem in our country. What else can we say? By the way, this is actually very important as we transition into the other story. You wonder why our country has so much violence? I know a lot of people like to only blame the politicians, and sure, they have a huge deal to be involved in that, considering the rhetoric, a lot of the inflammatory stuff. Yes, you could argue that, in this case, the assassin was radicalized by MSNBC Democrat-style rhetoric. At the same time, you can't help but also notice there's a lot of incidents of violence in this country that are directly caused by people who should have been in jail a long time ago. Irina Zarutska's, that whole case comes to mind as one example, who are let off the hook. They're being given a slap on the wrist. And by the way, as it pertains to political violence, you have to wonder, if the justice system shows it's going to go relatively modestly easy on a would-be presidential assassin, let me ask you the question, does that encourage more or less political violence when you give people who commit political violence a slap on the wrist? Well, I think the answer there is very clear. By the way, I would argue to a very large degree, years of leftist violence that we saw when Portland was rioting with Antifa back in 2018, BLM, all these different stories and situations where overall nothing was done about it. The few people who were arrested were immediately let out of jail. Everyone got a slap on the wrist. I would argue that very lax attitude toward the left-wing political violence of, say, Trump's first administration has now led and escalated and incentivized the type of extreme left-wing violence we're watching now, where it's like, okay, we're not rioting, we're not burning trash cans anymore, we're just straight up going to try to kill you. So that all said, that also segues us into the current situation in Washington, D.C. that's being investigated, and we're not exactly sure. But we'll tell you what happened and then maybe correlate that to potentially if it is an assassination attempt or if it was a case of political violence or even if the guy was just there to do some type of terrorist attack against the Washington Monument. That's also another possibility. Show you the lack of confidence we might have in the justice system to likewise handle this guy. It's infuriating and ridiculous. But as of a couple of hours ago, what we do know about what currently just happened in Washington is that Secret Service uniformed division officers shot a man who thought they might have a gun at the White House this afternoon before President Trump's press conference. So that was the initial reporting. What we know now is that it happened a little bit closer to the Washington Monument, but this part of the story is true, right? They saw the outline of what might be a gun. Secret Service confronted this guy, and then the guy starts opening fire on Secret Service and federal law enforcement officers. So certainly you have to imagine this guy wasn't just some random concealed carry permit holding guy, okay? He most certainly and most definitely was up to some type of no good, lurking around the Capitol, lurking around the Washington Monument. And the moment he gets found out by law enforcement, he starts trying to shoot them. And what we now know ever since is that apparently this took place all in the vicinity of J.D. Vance's motorcade near the White House. So basically, the Vance motorcade had just passed by this position minutes before, and then all of a sudden, Secret Service notices this guy who's carrying a gun in the very place where J.D. Vance just was, maybe even thinking Vance might make a second loop around. And yes, the man again opened fire on Secret Service. Secret Service returned fire. They took the shooter down. No law enforcement officers were injured, but unfortunately and tragically, it does appear that a juvenile, some like bystander, got hit by one of the stray bullets, but luckily he does appear to be in stable condition. But that's what we know thus far. So feel free to speculate on specifically what you think happened. Again, given we don't have the identity of the shooter, I'm not going to call it 100% an assassination attempt. It could be a potential assassination attempt, but I think it's very clear this guy had some type of violent criminal intent. And when you consider where he was, he's not on the ghetto side of DC. I don't think he was exactly a gangster or something. He's right near the Washington Monument. He's in the capital part of the Capitol. That I think terrorism of some form seems very likely here, actually, if you're doing something like that. But
approximately 3:30 this afternoon, our plainclothes officers and agents that consistently patrol the outer perimeter of the White House complex identified a suspicious individual that appeared to have a firearm. They called in support from our marked uniformed Secret Service police to make contact with that individual. Upon making contact, that individual fled briefly on foot, withdrew a firearm, and fired in the direction of our agents and officers. They returned fire and engaged. That individual was hit. He's since been transported to the hospital. I have no comments on his condition. I can tell you that at least one, we believe only one bystander was hit by the suspect. That individual, it's a juvenile, did not sustain any life-threatening injuries, but he's also receiving treatment at the hospital.
Yeah, so again, it's pure speculation at this point, but you put the dots together, I think it seems like this guy was trying to do some form of terrorism, because imagine that, right? So you have a suspicious figure right outside the Washington Monument in the place where J.D. Vance's motorcade was just passing by, and he's kind of just hanging out and loitering there, and then he gets approached by Secret Service because they're like, wait a minute, is that the outline? Is that the imprint of a gun? And then the moment they come up to him, he starts fleeing, he starts running away, and then turns back and starts shooting at the Secret Service. I mean, I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to understand this guy did not have good intentions, right? It's not just some random guy carrying a gun. He was clearly about to do something. Who knows? Maybe it could be the case that the guy was going to do a terrorist attack or a mass shooting right next to the Washington Monument, and it just so happened that J.D. Vance's motorcade being there may have just saved innocent bystanders. I'm not exactly sure, but at the same time, it doesn't sound like the biggest coincidence ever that he would pick that spot in particular, because you'd have to imagine, right? Washington Monument, not maybe the most crowded area of the Capitol or National Mall in DC that you could choose to target if you were just trying to do mass casualty. But if it was the place where the motorcade passed by, then I don't know, that would make perfect sense. Nonetheless, you just hope that the justice system figures this out and sorts this guy out. After all, he tried to kill people, he hit a child, he was trying to shoot at law enforcement. Yet when we look to the current state of the DC justice system, I'm not sure we have all that much confidence, especially when it comes to people who are engaged in political violence, because we have this brand new headline as of today. Apparently, the judge at least presiding over like the pre-trial proceedings right now in the assassination case, which, by the way, the shooter has indeed been charged with trying to assassinate the president. And if you wonder how that's going to go with this judge, well, the judge has apologized in court to the White House Correspondents Dinner shooting suspect Cole Allen. Magistrate judge here by the name of Zaya Faruqi, definitely, the type of name that makes you think of the founding fathers and John Marshall and people like that. But anyway, Zaya Faruqi sounds to be of Islamic or Middle Eastern descent or something there, right? Said that he was, quote, fascinated and disturbed by Allen's treatment in jail. So this is what the judge is actually concerned about. Not the fact that he just tried to assassinate the president, but apparently he's being mistreated in jail. Okay, well, let's hear the details. How is he being mistreated? Allen was placed on suicide watch when he was first imprisoned. Well, he just tried to assassinate the president after all. That makes sense, doesn't it? Why did prosecutors put him on suicide watch? Prosecutors argued that since Allen told investigators that he did not expect to survive the alleged attack, right? He was basically trying to do a murder-suicide. He could be a danger to himself, which makes perfect logical sense. Let me just say first and foremost, oh yeah, the guy effectively tried to do death by cop, or in this case, death by presidential assassination, and you look at that guy and think he might be suicidal, but let me also take that one step further. Aren't leftists the same people who claim that this whole incident was staged, right? It was completely fake? Well, one of the core arguments I brought up was that if it was some type of false flag, why would you leave the patsy alive? Isn't that a severe hole in the problem? But then secondly, okay, you would think if leftists truly believed in their heart of hearts that this whole thing was fake and staged, wouldn't you want the assassin to be on suicide watch and make sure he doesn't kill himself, or we don't have some Jeffrey Epstein style mystery going on? After all, by the way, Epstein's not the only one. I'd like to remind everyone, Lee Harvey Oswald, the JFK assassination, was shot and killed under mysterious circumstances by, what was his name, Jack Ruby, if I'm not mistaken, right? And there's a whole conspiracy around that basically Oswald might have been some type of CIA patsy and they assassinated him before he could talk. But, hey, leftists, if you actually think it's staged, if you actually think it's a false flag, why would you want to take the guy off a suicide watch? Can any of these wokesters explain that to me? Well, maybe there's an ulterior or alternative reason for it, which is that, first of all, it wasn't actually staged, but there is a very real reason still the guy should be on suicide watch, because if this goes to trial and it's exposed basically that he is just indeed, yes, this normal run-of-the-mill MSNBC watching No Kings Democrat, and that's all exposed on trial that, that's what he was all about, and then here he was trying to assassinate the president, that could be very credibility destroying for the left, right? It would do severe damage to the left wing in this country, and maybe they don't want that to happen, and that's why they're perfectly okay with the guy, killing himself. And if you're from his perspective and you're thinking, I'm just going to spend probably my whole life in prison, or I might even face the death penalty, why not maybe deny the justice system the satisfaction, deny conservatives the satisfaction by taking my own life before I'm convicted? Yeah, that's a completely real and legitimate concern. Let's not pretend as we haven't seen this story play out time and time again. So again, like, for all the reasons that you could put together, it makes, yes, perfect sense why the guy should be on suicide watch. Again, let's repeat this. He tried to assassinate the president. It's common sense. We have to make sure this guy stays alive until he goes to trial, and there's a lot of reasons why he or someone around him might have incentives to not make that happen, right? But anyways, so an incredulous Faruqi, Judge Faruqi here again, was not convinced by that argument, drawing comparisons between Allen and the defendants arrested for rioting at the Capitol on January 6th. So basically his argument is that, well, if the Jan 6 guys weren't placed on suicide watch, then why would Allen? Okay, I know this is a crazy take, I know, because you guys claim it's an insurrection or something, but All that happened on J6 was that some of the people there started to engage in riot and unlawful assembly, and basically that's it, right? So, yeah, I think there is a difference in the suicidal nature of someone who maybe is rioting, some tear gas, whatever, right? Storming into a police line where they have batons, typical civil unrest style stuff, versus a murder suicide where you're trying to like run into the room like a lunatic and trying to assassinate the president. Again, I know, crazy opinion, but to me, they're not exactly the same exact thing. I think there's a totally reasonable argument you can make as to why someone from J6 who's facing trespassing charges or, some unlawful unrest, whatever, like disturbing the peace style charges, I don't know, might be less important to place on suicide watch, Mr. Woke Judge, than the murder-suicide presidential assassin guy. Again, I know you're going to claim, no, because January 6th was an armed, violent insurrection and they were running into the Capitol to kill politicians, but that's not true. That's not actually what was happening, and it's a ridiculous comparison to even be making. But here's what that judge said, quote, "To me, it's extremely disturbing that he was put in 5-point restraints, a person with no criminal history. It's troubling." Yeah, he had no criminal history. He just tried to assassinate the president, right? And by the way, I would argue that even makes this guy crazier. He had no criminal history, no record of anything, but suddenly he went completely insane and tried to assassinate the president. And you're saying to yourself, why did they put him in the straitjacket? Why do they think he might be mentally unstable? You don't see the signs all around you, Mr. Woke Judge? That's crazy. And then he says, it's troubling. I never heard of one Jan 6 defendant who was put in 5-point restraints or in a safe cell. If the only way to keep him safe is the most punitive thing, that's a problem. Well, we're really arguing about this right now. First of all, Jan 6 defendants were not treated well in prison. That's a pretty well-documented fact. As a matter of fact, the situation in that D.C. jail was pretty awful, and you may remember a lot of the coverage about that. So, to sit here and pretend as if the J6ers had some Bahamas-style vacation going on is just ridiculous. But, okay, all of that aside, again, because maybe a Jan 6 rioter and a presidential assassin are not on the same level of instability or insanity. Like, this isn't hard to understand. None of the Jan 6 rioters even killed a single person or were trying to do so, right? They didn't go into the Capitol with guns despite your claims it was a armed insurrection because guys were carrying some flags or something like that. That's the difference here, Woke Judge. What else do we have to explain? I think we already did. But anyways, he further goes on to say, at a minimum, I should be apologizing to him. We are obligated to make sure he's taken care of. Mr. Allen, I'm sorry that things have not been the way they're supposed to. You're apologizing to the political assassin terrorist. Yeah, I'm sure this trial is just going to be 100% straightforward and fair. And look, don't get me wrong. I'm not telling you that they're going to release the guy on the streets. Even this judge is not, even if he wants to, could not realistically make that happen. But there is a very real concern that, they might try to give him a slap on the wrist in terms of sentencing or something, or they say he's not guilty of the presidential assassination charge because even though he said it, oh, well, we don't know if we have the full proof of that, right? So he'll just get 10 years in prison, 15 instead of what he should be getting, which is beyond a life sentence. If you know what I mean by that. So definitely this is something I would be worried about.
But the judge very concerned about his constitutional rights, saying the defendant has requested a Bible, has requested meetings with his legal team, and that has not been allowed. He's been put in restrictive 24-hour lockup with no windows in a padded room without an opportunity to get out for recreation. And so the judge making it clear to the Department of Corrections that he wants answers by tomorrow morning about exactly what the housing determination will be made for the suspect in this case, out of grave concern about his constitutional rights, and that apology issued near the end of the hearing. And so,
I mean, literally, this is beyond satire. We have woke judges who are more concerned about whether the would-be assassin and terrorist gets preferential treatment. Does he have sunlight? Is he able to go outside for recreation? All this ridiculous nonsense. Then let me repeat, very valid and real interest that the federal government has in making sure the guy stays alive till trial, right? Because Again, it is a completely valid argument, but even so, we're more concerned about the freaking so-called constitutional rights of the murderer terrorist than actually just like putting him in jail the proper way. Because, and by the way, let me just point out that nothing about this is unconstitutional. It's not unconstitutional to be placed on suicide watch. It's not even cruel or unusual punishment because, again, given these circumstances, it makes perfect logical sense to why you would place a political assassin on suicide watch, especially at least until the trial, right? But no, according to this judge, yeah, we're so sorry. You've been mistreated, you know? And you notice the way this judge is treating the guy too. Basically, it's as if he was just sort of some normal street criminal, you know? Oh, you got caught up with some bad stuff, you sold drugs or whatever, maybe robbed the store, and you should be on that level, right? Not that you're an attempted murderer, you're actually even beyond like a murderer, you're a freaking political terrorist, an assassin. No. You deserve recreation time. You deserve to be treated like a normal prisoner, a normal inmate. What about you is exceptional? So you notice even then, like through that whole framing, I would argue the judge is really trying to downplay what actually happened here. You see what I'm saying there? And that's the whole point is, you know, they're trying to make it sound like they're basically setting up to say, yeah, maybe he broke the law, but it wasn't actually an assassination attempt, right? Hey, 5 years, 10-year prison sentence at most. He didn't really do anything all that severe. In the same sense, you know, you have Democrats who try to say Charlie Kirk wasn't assassinated. He was just a victim of random gun violence. There was no political nature to it. All of this, of course, is to the end conclusion of this is what? To make excuses to downplay, to lessen left-wing political violence, which in turn creates stronger incentive structures for leftists to keep on committing violence because, hey, it's not even that big a deal when they do it, right? No one's really going to come after them in a strong or very severe way. And then as a result, what happens? You get more violence. And yes, that's the entire point. That's the entire point. And that's the problem we have with judges in this country. So, you know, just keep in mind, when we look to some of the political violence that happens, I know it's very easy to say Democrat politicians, the media. That part is certainly true. But don't forget, I would argue the judiciary has something very strong to do with this. Because if they had quashed this left-wing violence problem years ago when it was starting to flare up, had these people been in prison, incarcerated, and it was shown to these people, you're not going to get away with this, I don't think we would have it keep escalating into more and more severe circumstances like today. You know, the fact that we actually didn't crack down on the left as we should have has now created a situation where the left is running rampant, and that's what you're dealing with. But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.